I'm the Dean Research at Massey University, and my role as Dean Research is responsibility for our graduate research school, which looks after about 1,100 doctoral students, and also responsibility for scholarships across the university from undergraduate through to doctoral level. I'm also a professor of education, and my research and teaching interest for over 30 years now has been gifted and talented education. And so I'm in a very, very privileged position, I feel, of being able to think about all of the research and teaching around giftedness and how we work with gifted learners in a very much an academic leadership role within the university. I had the joy and privilege of meeting my colleague Aniek when she was a doctoral student at the university. She served with me as a student representative on a university doctoral research committee, and as soon as she finished, I swooped her up and hired her. So I will let Aniek, your colleague from the Netherlands, introduce herself to you.
Goedenavond. Hello. Thank you for all being online still at what is quite late for most of you probably in the Netherlands. So I'm Aniek, and I grew up in the narrowest part of the Netherlands, so near Sittard. And I don't know if people know, but the country is around that area, only 5 kilometers wide. Then I studied in Wageningen, a bachelor and a master of applied communication science, and then I moved to New Zealand, Aotearoa, New Zealand, to complete a doctorate at Massey University. As Tracey said, I'm now working at Massey as a scholar development coordinator. And in this role, I supported development and now coordinate the Scholars at Massey program, and that is what we are going to present about. So Scholars at Massey is an idea by Tracey, and you'll hear more about it now.
Thank you. Thanks. Aniek, you want to go to the next slide? So we thought what we would share with you today is, first of all, setting the context and giving you some understanding of the education system in New Zealand and applying that specifically to honours education, because we recognise that's the focus of your conference. Thinking about the research problem that Aniek and I faced and the solution that we designed for that, sharing with you some of what we've learned about Scholars at Massey or through the work we've done with Scholars at Massey, and then having a bit of a discussion at the end will obviously be really important as well. So let's talk about the New Zealand context. Aniek, if you can go to the next slide. New Zealand is an island nation. We're down in the bottom of the South Pacific. Our Māori name is Aotearoa, and Māori are the indigenous people of New Zealand. We have a population of just under 5 million, and anyone who follows news would have possibly heard of our Prime Minister during COVID referring to us as the team of 5 million. And we have three official languages in the country: English, Te Reo Māori, and New Zealand Sign Language. And there are 8 universities in New Zealand, and all of those universities are ranked in the top 3% of universities worldwide in international rankings and surveys. We have one of the highest degree completion rates in the world. Around 80, just over 80% of our students who undertake bachelor's degrees do complete those degrees. So we're very proud of that fact that our education system supports those students to the completion of their degrees. And about 43,000 New Zealanders and international students graduate each year from our 8 universities. Now, I wanted to give Aniek a chance to give us 2 or 3 ideas. Share with us, Aniek, what you see as the similarities and differences maybe between the Netherlands and New Zealand.
Okay, so I focus mainly on differences. So I think one, maybe obvious one. So the surface area of the Netherlands fits approximately 9 times in the surface area of New Zealand. But as you can see, the population of New Zealand is 4.9 million. I think the Dutch population is around 17, which means that it's a lot more densely populated in the Netherlands. Then another thing is, coming from the sunny south of the Netherlands, I was always proud of the mountains we have in the south. But having lived in New Zealand for a few years now, I don't really dare to call them mountains anymore. So I have started to refer them as hills. And I guess a combination of these mountains and the nature and the country being less densely populated is that there's a lot of opportunity for hiking, and that's what they call tramping in New Zealand, and that's really nice. And then I think, well, stick to the topic. One thing that applies to university, so here when we talk about undergraduate, so Tracey will refer to undergraduate and postgraduate quite a bit, and with undergraduates, it's meant bachelor students, and postgraduate would be anything after the bachelor, so master's studies or doctoral studies.
Thank you, Aniek. Let's go to the next slide. That's a good lead into talking a little bit about Massey University, which is the context where our program and the research that we're undertaking about the program really sits. We are one of the largest universities in New Zealand. We have about 34,000 students, and interestingly, around 38% of our students are distance students. So historically, Massey University has been the distance education provider for the country. As Aniek said, our population is quite spread and spread quite thinly. About a third of the population lives in Auckland, and the rest of us live in the rest of the country. And so there's a real need for distance education for people, particularly in remote and rural areas. So Massey has been the university that's provided that. We also have 3 campuses, which is quite unique. One in Palmerston North, where Aniek and I are based, one in Wellington, one in Auckland, and we have 5 colleges, and in those 5 colleges is where the degree program sits. What many of you may be interested in is what a Bachelor's Honours degree means in the New Zealand context, because I think it's quite different from what happens in the Netherlands, what I understand from the work that I've read from the Netherlands, but also in other parts of the world. In the United States, where I come from originally, it's quite a different way of thinking about an honours degree program. It is considered postgraduate level, so an honours degree in our country enables students to go into doctoral level education, and there's an element of advanced study within it. I think the key difference is that to enter an honours degree in New Zealand, it's an opportunity given to you after you've completed 3 years of your bachelor's degree study in the same process, same content, same program as everybody else. So there's not very much differentiation that occurs for those students in the first 3 years, but for students who are high achieving, they may be eligible to go into an honours program. So the entry is based on high achievement and above average performance within the bachelor's degree. Now at Massey, we actually have another sort of bachelor's honours degree, which is an undergraduate qualification, and that degree is for our design students who come in on selected entry, meaning that when they apply, each individual student is considered for the level of their artistic ability, design ability, and then they undertake a 4-year degree, and they come out with a bachelor's honours, but that would not necessarily enable postgraduate. We only have about 50 students of our 34,000 who are currently enrolled in an honours degree. So if you go to the next slide, Aniek, this is where we are led to a bit of a conundrum for me as someone who really, really is passionate about gifted and talented students, and particularly around differentiation. So when I became the chair of the University Scholarships Committee, one of the key challenges for me was that we didn't have any sort of a scholarship strategy. And I knew that we had excellent students. We had high-performing students who were coming in on scholarships. And we award about 1,600 scholarships a year at our university across all of the different levels. And those are the scholarships that we manage and run through our university. There are other scholarships as well. And we also, our students have access to those other scholarships. So there was a real drive to develop a strategy for the university that considered excellence, which is what scholarships are awarded for, whether it's academic excellence, leadership excellence, athletic excellence, cultural excellence, any of those wide multi-potentialities, and then equity. So what was happening was that our Māori students, our Pacific students, any of our diverse students were not necessarily receiving scholarships at the same rate as as those what we call pakeha, or people like me, white middle class students, were receiving the scholarship. So we had this conundrum of excellence and equity, and so we worked really hard as a scholarships committee to develop a strategy to enhance the equity around our scholarships. I had a view that if we were being more equitable, then the next challenge we had was, how do we ensure that those students who are receiving those scholarships are actually achieving excellent results? So how do we enable that excellence when we're awarding more equitably? The other challenge I had was that I sit on the University New Zealand Scholarship Committee, and I would go to these and I would be seeing all of these applications from the other 7 universities, and Massey students were not applying for those scholarships, and they are as excellent as all of the other students. So how do we create the pathways of access to increase their success in scholarships? Those were the problems. And Aniek, if you go to the next slide, we started thinking about a solution, and I hope you can see this. It's quite small text on my screen, but we can share the PowerPoint with you. If you look at the literature, there is some writing coming from the United States from Cobain and Jennings from around 2017, where they described the synergies between the honors program at Western Kentucky University and their Office of Scholar Development. I read their work and I met with Craig Cobain at Western Kentucky, and I thought, right, this is going to be a solution for me. How can we work to develop these scholars in ways that will be meaningful for them? So drawing from his work, thinking too about some of the work coming out of the Netherlands more recently, and reading the work preparing for the conference, I thought, well, there are going to be spin-off effects that are going to occur if we can think about solving these problems of equity and excellence and pathways for our scholars. And also, I really believe very firmly that we can have excellence with equity. I don't think it's a one or another game. So drawing again from some of Ren and Cobain's work there. And I guess the final thing for me was thinking, as someone responsible for the budget, of how can I strategically invest the resources to create the most opportunities for our scholars at the university. So what we came up with, next slide Aniek, was a program called Scholars at Massey. And Scholars at Massey is a learning and development program for scholars, and Aniek's going to share with you how we designed that to enhance their scholar development and their personal development within a peer community. And that peer community is quite interesting because it is all of our students from the bachelor's degree students all the way through to doctoral degree level students at the university. The program is led by 10 peer scholars. So these are students who hold scholarships and they are in leadership positions, and they work very closely with Aniek, and again she's going to share some of that. And the program is co-designed with the scholars, Aniek, myself, and members of the University Scholarships Committee using an inquiry, research inquiry. At this point I'm going to hand over to Aniek, who's going to talk to you about the research methodology that she's been undertaking, or we've been undertaking, and about the program itself. Aniek.
Thank you, Tracey. So what Tracey already alluded to, actually in designing solutions or in developing the program, one of the first things we did was actually research. So the development of the program is informed by research. So we did focus groups with staff, but also with students, to get a good idea about what students' needs are in that scholar development space, because it's a new thing for Massey. So as you can see on this slide, this is there are some data that came from the research. So we surveyed 288 students in a 23-question survey. The respondents also were all the way through. So we had undergraduate, we had honors, we had master's and doctoral students. All campuses were represented. And maybe an interesting thing is that more females than males completed the survey, and that's also what we see in scholarship applications. So there are actually more females generally applying for scholarships than males. And what came out of that survey, you can see on the right side, students were really keen to have workshops on career development, leadership development, dealing with self-sabotage, health and well-being. They were also keen on the idea of a community of peer support. and they saw the value of being mentored by more experienced students. And we didn't put this on a slide, but more specifically regarding personal development, undergraduate students were also keen to learn more about doctoral research and pathways into research. And then the postgraduate students wanted to increase employability by these mentoring opportunities as well. And postgraduates were keen to develop transferable skills. So, well, research skills that you get in your doctorate, how can you transfer that to other professions? Okay, so the other findings from that research were that actually the scholarships committee and staff reported that there was huge variability in the quantity and quality of applications. So for some scholarships, we would receive very limited applications, and some applications would be really good, but some also could use some work. What students indicated was that they actually didn't really know about opportunities available to them. And I think the third point is quite an interesting one, because students also said that they don't really see themselves in scholarships. So even students that are eligible wouldn't feel like a scholarship is them. And well, this could be imposter syndrome, or what we call what they call in New Zealand, or what is used a lot here, the tall puppy syndrome. So tall puppy syndrome refers to a cultural expectation for people to be humble and self-deprecating. So having a scholarship or seeing yourself as deserving of a scholarship could conflict with that expectation. Or another thing that could be behind that is that there's just a need for more actively encouraging students and targeting advice to eligible students. Okay, there we go. So looking at the aims of the program, the first aim is to connect scholars with a peer community, so to build a community of scholars that support each other. Then to enhance the skills of experiences of these scholars, and to provide support to students with ongoing applications for scholarships, grants, and awards. You can see already a few photos of the 10 peer scholars where they're preparing, in the bottom they're preparing an event, and at the top they have some personal development workshop. This is one of the peer scholars from last year and this year actually. And this is a quote of why she got involved into the program. This is Jess. And she's really keen on that. Well, as you can see from the quote, she's really keen on that community aspect and working together with other scholars, which is what the program is really about. Okay, so then talking a bit more about, so what have we done and when did it start? So in 2019 was very exciting. Wait, did I now go? Sorry, I should go back. Okay, I should talk a bit more about this. So each year we have 10 so-called peer scholars, and they work as leaders of the program. So they help organize events, they provide mentoring for other students, and they also help build the community of scholars. And as you can see in the bottom of the screen is Jess, and the top of the screen is the 10 peer scholars that we had selected for this year. And for these scholars these peer scholars to get that position, there's an application selection process they need to go through. And then after that process, in that process we select 10 scholars, and then afterwards they are provided with a special personal development program for them, so to do their role well. So to start the academic year, we engage them in an intensive boot camp, and then that's both for team building, and they get to know each other, and they also get strengths training. They learn about developing the right culture in a group. They get some facilitation training, and they also get the opportunity to say something about what the program will look like for the year. And they also receive a scholarship that is valued at 10,000 New Zealand dollars, including learning and development. Okay, and then now we'll go into what we've done. So a timeline. In 2019 was really exciting because the funding for the program was approved. And then I was appointed as Scholar Development Coordinator, and we selected our first 10 peer scholars. We also started the research component of the program. So what I just told you about, the evidence that came out of that research, and this research directed development of the program. So then in 2020, we were super excited for the pilot to commence, but the week of the launch, lockdown hit. So as you can see, a nice image of COVID. So 2020 happened double. So we had to change plans, and we moved the program online. And actually that went quite well. We shifted it pretty quick, and I think we did quite well on that. But of course it had some effects on what we could and could not do. In 2020, we organized the first undergraduate research symposium. We organized a variety of workshops, and you can see some examples in the photos. So there was a workshop on writing your CV. There was an info session for Fulbright. We had a LinkedIn workshop. Then we also launched Something to Chew On. And this is an initiative by one of the peer scholars from last year, and it's a series of conversations about research between staff and students. So it's a bit like Science Cafe. And then we had actually really good success with Fulbright and Rhodes, because in the year before the program started, we had, I think, one application for Fulbright. And in 2020, we supported students with their applications, and we had 5 successful. So we had, I think, 10 students applying, and 5 of them were successful. So that was a really good outcome. And then it's now 2021, and we are out of lockdown here. But still, we decided to implement a blended program. So part of the program is still online, because we learned a lot about doing sessions online, and we actually learned that some of it can be done really well online. And that means that we can also access all campuses and students that study from a distance. And as Tracey said before, that there is quite a focus on distance learning at Massey. And we changed some of the topics of the workshops we're offering this year. So we, for example, have themed weeks. So we had a publishing week this year, which was really successful. So that was students learned about all aspects of publishing their research. There is a week on professional skills and leadership, and also other workshops. And then now the next step is to actually develop resources specific to applying for scholarships. So was it this week, Tracey, or was it last week? We made a video on how to write a winning scholarship application. So demystifying the application process. And we're going to also send targeted emails to students about scholarships they're eligible for. So we have done that with Fulbright and Rhodes, and that has proved successful. So we want to expand on that and do that with more opportunities. And when we do this targeted advertisement to students, we will also include the resources that we are now developing. Okay, and I will now hand it over again to Tracey, who's going to share some lessons from Scholars at Massey.
Thank you, Aniek. So in preparing, if you go to the next slide, Aniek, in preparing for this, I did a bit of reading around honours, and it was read a really interesting article that talked about how you can stimulate the honours community. And this table of strategies we inadvertently, I think, have been using within the work we've been doing within Scholars at Massey. So matching the students' willingness and capabilities with the program. So the 10 peer scholars who Aniek was referring to are all selected based on their interest and desire to be leaders within the program. There is a challenging set of teamwork activities we engage those scholars in right from the start, and as Aniek explained, we have students taking the lead on initiatives. So we're not designing the program for them, we're designing the program with them. We also have a very intense period of interaction and engagement, particularly with the 10 peer scholars. But then when students begin a scholar development, a process of applying for scholars, we have intense engagement with them again. So if a student says, I want to apply for a Rhodes Scholarship, we will work directly with that student through the application process. If they get shortlisted, we'll do mock interviews and work with them through the interview process. I think one of the interesting things too is the interactive activities, which we have had to go into a blended approach. That has meant that our students on all of our campuses have access. Initially, they were only accessible through one of our campuses as a pilot program, so that's been a real learning for us. And there's always feedback and evaluation happening. I'm going to share some of those, some of the feedback with you as well. If you go to the next slide, Aniek, you can see on the next slide some of the comments coming from the students. So students have, and I know there's a lot of text there, but students have shared with us that they feel they're in a supportive community of peers. They really enjoy that. They feel there are other people who are going through the same experience who they can connect with. They're appreciating the tips and the advice on how to apply for a scholarship, how to choose their references, how to perform in an interview. We also have a range of motivational speakers, and we've looked at things like sabotage, topics like perfectionism, all of those social emotional aspects of giftedness impact on these scholars as well, and we've tried to encourage their development through that personal development. Having information and also working with one another and looking at their own work in relation to their peers, having their peers look at their applications, giving them advice and feedback on their CVs, etc. If you go to the next slide, Aniek, I think that what we've learned is that we are encouraging some self-responsibility for the personal and scholar development. It is a program that students can opt into if they want to. The real emphasis on learning with, from, and about other people in that like-minded community is really important. I think students are learning about themselves. They're working out what their strengths are. We have a big focus on strengths, particularly with the peer scholars, learning about their abilities, being proud of their abilities, knocking that tall poppy syndrome in the head that we experience here in New Zealand, making them really aware of the opportunities. So as Aniek said, many of the students didn't even know the scholarship existed, much less that they might be eligible for it. So we are sending targeted emails to students who we know meet the criteria and then encouraging those students to apply for those scholarships. And my view is, and it's quoted, Cobain talks about this quite a bit, is that if we can prepare them for success in scholarships, we're actually preparing them for success in many other aspects of their future to come, whether it's enrolling in a doctoral program or their career development. Next slide, Aniek. We've got some feedback from our colleagues around the university. Again, I know this is a lot of text on this slide, but what our colleagues, professors within the university, people who are Fulbright holders are saying is the same thing our students are saying. We're getting positive results, being part of that community, having those conversations and sharing those experiences with one another is really builds that resilience of the community. And I hadn't really thought about resilience, but I do think that's an important aspect of it. The program is having timely information sessions, rapid responses. We're engaging with many of the external scholarship program developers like the Fulbright, Rhodes, Universities New Zealand scholarships, etc., and that community of scholars. Go to the next slide, please, Aniek. I know where our time is running, so I want to try to get through these quickly. We are also, the peer scholars themselves gave us some very practical and pragmatic tips as the leaders of the program, saying, you know, it was great, we had a lot of activities going on, but we need to actually tailor it to what our community wants. So as the students come up with ideas, we let them go with that idea. If they say we want to run a workshop on X, Y, and Z, we go with that. But sometimes we need to make sure that they are engaging with their audience, because we get very little turnout. With others, we get lots of students participating. We did transition online, but we really do want some of that face-to-face as well. As we all know, Zoom, we can all get Zoom fatigue. The increase in the success was really important, and now we're wanting to offer more group peer feedback and input. Aniek spent a lot of time personally working directly with scholars. We're now working with some of the students and thinking about ways we can offer group feedback rather than always one-on-one, because that's quite time intensive. You can see the rest of their comments there. Having a plan for the year is really important, and as we were literally making it up as we went during 2020. I think the whole world was. Next slide, Aniek. So Do we enable excellence? How do we do that? We do that through personal development. We do that through creating that community of like-minded peers and engaging scholars, whether they're staff and students with expertise. So we have built that wider peer community, not just with the students, but also with staff within the university who have oversight and responsibility for scholarships. We also feel that we're starting to create those pathways through identifying the scholars, through delivering the information in a variety of ways, not just in a face-to-face meeting, not just in email, having a supportive application process, including mock interviews, and having that peer support. Next slide, Aniek. The next steps for us are to continue the ongoing research, evaluating the effectiveness of the program. It is a pilot program, so we've had 2 years of funding, and Aniek and I are in the throes of finalising a report and proposal to our foundation to continue that funding. And in continuing that funding, we want to ensure that we extend the activities to all of our campuses in a blended way. We want to make sure that we've got that online community of support there, that we run the online, but we also need some more administrative support within the program for that targeted advertising. We know it works. And we also want to develop scholarship packages for the university. So we get away from just having funding available, that all students who receive scholarships are part of that scholarship is being part of this community in a much more much more direct way. We had a few points for discussion. Sorry, we've gone a little bit over time in what we've shared, but I think these points are there, but also we're happy to answer any questions that people might have about the program. And I'll just open up the floor at this point and thank everyone for joining us.
Thank you very much. There is a question in the Q&A. Can you tell us something more about your research evaluating the effectiveness?
Yes, so we are still involved in that because we're still running the program at the same time. But what we have planned, and we've just going through the ethics process for that, because these are Massey students, we're having to go through an iterative ethics process. We will be running surveys and focus groups with staff and students, and we'll be launching those a little bit later this year. Throughout the program, we have run, every time we run a workshop, Aniek evaluates the effectiveness of that specific workshop. We have had focus groups with the peer scholars last year, discussions with them. So we have some of that material, but we have not at this point pulled it all together as an evaluation. But we will be running a sort of quantitative and qualitative evaluation. Also, I guess the other indicator of effectiveness is looking at the increase in students who are receiving particularly external, really prestigious scholarships. So one indicator to me is when you go in 1 year from having 1 student apply for a Fulbright to the following year having 7 students shortlisted for a Fulbright and 5 of those receive a Fulbright is a huge huge evidence of the impact of effectiveness. We'll see if we can do the same thing this year.
Thank you very much, and it would be very nice if you were going to publish about this as well. Do you include this in your plans?
Yes, we will be planning to publish it. So Aniek and I are hoping to engage a student scholar with us later this year to help us with publishing. There's very little that's written on scholar development in the way we are defining it. And I'd be really open to any suggestions around from the honours education or anything to do with tertiary or university studies and highly able students that people would like to pass on to us to incorporate within the study as well.
There's also a question in the chat. You mentioned that scholarship is much more applied for by females, and different for scholarship between women, 72%, and men, 27%. Is that split representative of the student population of your university?
It is close. That's a very good question. So it is and it isn't. We do have slightly more females enrolled, but it's more like it varies from program to program. So with our doctoral students, for example, it's about 52% female, and yet we're getting a much higher uptake of scholarships. And the number of applications coming in for scholarships is higher for females. Here in New Zealand, female students coming out of secondary school are exceeding and excelling above males, and so they're the ones who are applying for scholarships, and they're the ones who are getting those scholarships. As a mother of 3 sons, that really worries me. As a woman, I'm really proud.
Yeah, well, we see the same in the Netherlands, that women are doing well, are really excelling, also in PhD programs. Well, yes. There's some time behind that. So yeah.
Yeah.
You were also talking about the self-sabotage part. Could you elaborate a bit on those issues and what your program is offering?
Yeah, so self-sabotage is one of the issues that the students were quite interested in. And here in New Zealand, Aniek mentioned the tall poppy syndrome, and there is this sort of sense of self-depreciation and really not speaking out about your abilities, and I think that can sometimes actually sabotage your plans, and I think perfectionism comes into play as well. So what we've been doing with the students, we have Dr. Hugh Kearns, who is from the Adelaide, Australia, and Hugh has run an online workshop with the students, which we got really positive feedback about. I think also focusing on their strengths is helpful. We do also, I mean, if a student, and this is more general, but as the dean with doctoral students, if I see students self-sabotaging, I had one yesterday on the phone actually, where her self-confidence is so low she won't submit any work, and I keep saying, well, we can't assess your work if you don't submit the work. So I do refer them sometimes to our counselling services. We have excellent counselling services, and they'll work one-on-one with students about self-affirmation. So we're mainly at the moment addressing it through workshops and really just encouraging the students to identify as scholars and talking about some of those issues amongst themselves and with us.
Yeah, and I assume as a lot of your education is already distant learning, that a lot of those workshops are online?
Yes, yeah. Yes. Yeah, and we, that wasn't our intention at the beginning, because we do have students on campus, and we thought, well, we'll run it on one of our campuses. But then when COVID hit, we had to go online, and it has been really positive because we've gotten an increased number of students across our 3 campuses and the distant students who now have access to that.
Yeah, that's nice. That's nice.
It is.
We had the same experience, that all kinds of personal development workshops that you assumed should be better face-to-face did turn out quite well online. Yeah,
absolutely. As we got better using Zoom, we've gotten better at it too, using breakout rooms, and I think, but the face-to-face is really nice too. The students still want that, so we're hoping we can on the campuses have some of those face-to-face events happening as well.
Yes, I see also a very nice question from Roya. She is mentioning that there are a lot of people from different cultures in New Zealand. Do you see that there are differences in applying for scholarship, like from the gender issue? And also, how do you create this committed community while you have so many cultures?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Roya. We have, one of the things we were seeing initially was that our Māori students were not applying for scholarships. There are Indigenous students, and our Pacific students were not. So we have an office, if you like, for Māori studies and for Pacific. We have many support people. We work directly with them. As far as our international students applying for scholarships, so we are getting, so I'll back up, we have gotten an increase in the numbers of those students applying for those scholarships now, and I'm hoping we can keep I did a lot of work with our scholarships committee to help them understand equity and diversity, and so we are awarding more to those students, which was part of the motivation for setting up Scholars at Massey. In terms of our international students, certainly with our doctoral scholarships, which is our highest value scholarship, we get a large number of international students applying for those scholarships, specifically in sciences and in business, and that's because we have a large international student population in those two discipline areas. We have more of our domestic students applying in social sciences, creative arts, and health. Well, health is kind of some of both, but that's kind of not surprising because that reflects our international student population. So we are getting the international students applying, but also our international students are often applying for New Zealand federal aid scholarships. There's some, and their own government scholarships. I don't have any insight into how those students are succeeding in attaining those government scholarships. How do we create a like-minded community and a multicultural? Well, the like-mindedness is around their excellence, and I think that's how we create that inclusive community. I think within my office too, we've got Aniek from the Netherlands, we've got me from the United States. I wish we had a Māori or Pacific staff member who worked with us as well, but I don't think that we have major issues around multiculturalism from what I've experienced.
And I think to add to that, we also, the group of peer scholars, we try, in selecting them, we try to make that group also representative. Well, we can't do that entirely because we can't make that group entirely representative of diversity, but we always make sure to have, or this year we have a few international students in there. We have 2 males. So, yeah.
It's very interesting that when you follow the different sessions of this conference, you can hear that some topics are coming back. So this morning we had presentations from University of Connecticut, also very famous for the giftedness program, and they were sharing that they included more and more peers as well as mentors, and that these peers were, well, a key of success of their honors program. And so you are sharing the same experience. Yes.
Yeah.
So
really
I want to thank you very much because we are almost to the end of this session. Thank you very, very much for this session.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a very good sleep, everyone. And thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a good evening.